Direct from Foxborough, Massachusetts, the gem of Norfolk County, and taped at the studios of Foxborough Cable Access. It's Foxborough Central, and here's your host, Bob Hickey.
Welcome to another episode of Foxborough Central. I am Bob Hickey, your host. Thank you for taking the time to join me and my guests as we talk about the people, events, and organizations that make Foxborough truly the gem of Norfolk County. I'm honored to be joined today by my guest, Joe Shortsleeve. Mr. Shortsleeve, how are you doing today?
Good. Thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate the invitation.
It's an honor for me for a number of reasons. One, having seen you and being a professional, I feel as though the table should be turned. But today I'm going to do the interviewing because
I know. So therefore I'm sweating, Bob. I'm sweating. I like to tell people I only did 30 years of TV news in Boston.
Well, I don't believe you're perspiring, but I'm going to go with it. So we are here because Mr. Shortsleeve is running for the soon-to-be vacant seat in the state Senate.
It currently is vacant.
Currently vacant, formerly held by Jim Timilty, Democrat out of Walpole, who has moved on to greener pastures into the Treasurer's office, correct?
Yeah, Norfolk County Treasurer.
Norfolk County Treasurer. So you are running as an independent.
I am.
And you have taken the plunge, thrown your hat into the ring, and you are ready to serve.
Yeah, it's interesting. I did 30 years of television in Boston, and I left television, left WBZ in 2014. And the last 10 years at Channel 4, what I did was I worked for the I-Team, the investigative unit. And basically what you did every day was you fought for the taxpayer. I mean, it really was. I mean, when you look at all the stories that we would focus on, whether it was federal money or state money or local money or city hall money, they were all interconnected to the taxpayer.
Right.
So when I moved to Medfield, I didn't actually know that I actually moved into Jim Timilty's district. I didn't. And Jim and I were pretty good friends. He was actually one of the good guys on Beacon Hill that I dealt with quite a bit. And when I moved into his district, I said, that would be interesting. I said, but Jim's younger than me, and he's not going anywhere. But then he made this decision to resign, and it was like a bolt of lightning. It was a real moment of clarity for me. I said, Joe, you should do this. You should do this. So here I sit, Bob.
Well, fantastic. So Joe Shortsleeve is running for state senate, and we're going to put this information out here now so that we can then have a conversation, talk about some of the events that you see really impacting us now in the future, and then just do a little background, shall we? So first of all, we're going to hit your website, which is www.joeshortsleeve.com. Sounds just like we say it. And also, if you want to reach out, as I did, to invite him on our program, you can reach out to Joe at joeshortsleeve.com by email. So, Joe, can I call you Joe?
Of course you can.
Fantastic. We're going to do that, and I'm going to start off at the beginning. So in your time working with BZ on the I-Team, you got to know the players, got to know the behind-the-scenes, I don't want to call it network again, but the behind-the-scenes way that things work up there. How do you, as an independent, see yourself fitting in as a state senator?
Well, I think that today, as you look at what's going on in politics, primarily on the national stage, but probably to a lesser degree on the local stage, but I think that the harsh partisan rhetoric, which is now just part and parcel of politics, has really paralyzed this country. And I think that people, and I've been knocking on doors now, this is new to me, canvassing, but I've been knocking on a lot of doors, and whenever you say to people, people are fed up with the harsh partisan rhetoric on the right and on the left. Everybody universally says, yes, we really are. I don't think the parties are listening to the people. The parties seem to be listening to the politicians. And I think it's more important right now that politicians listen to the people. So I made the decision to run as an independent. And I have said that if I were lucky enough to be elected in the Bristol-Norfolk district, that I would caucus with the Democrats. And the reason for that is, quite practically, a practical one. That's where the power is. Mm-hmm. So I have said that, and the party officials on the Democratic side know that. So I think that they are, feel like that if I were to win, that they would also get a win.
Fantastic. So I suppose we all have to label ourselves. We label everything in the world. So if you were to label yourself conservative, liberal, middle of the road, fiscally, socially, what type of a politician would you say? And by the way, it's a refreshing breath. It's not a politician. You're certainly not a career politician.
No, I'm not a politician.
So coming in, how would you describe yourself if we were at a cocktail party and you say, hey, I am...
I'm socially liberal. I'm fiscally conservative. I'd like to say that I am the moderate voice of reason in the middle. And I think that one thing you saw in the party process that just took place, we had this primaries take place, and the Democrats have a self-avowed Bernie Sanders Democrat, and the Republicans have a very, I think I might put another very in there, a very conservative Republican. So you have this, great divide, and I would like to think that as a moderate voice of reason, somebody who is willing to have a conversation with either side, to pick solutions on either side, that's where I sit. I sit in the middle. And I'm, the people on Beacon Hill, I'm not going up there to make friends with them. They know me, and I know them. It's like I got a call the other day from the reporter at the Sun Chronicle newspaper, and he said, well, what are you going to do, Joe? Because heard that Charlie Baker might, campaign for Jacob, and that Joe Kennedy's already been out with Paul Feeney. What are you going to do? And I thought to myself, I said, I know Joe Kennedy. I've had many conversations with him. I know Charlie Baker. I was with him not too long ago, probably within the past 10 days. That's a perfect example of how if I were on Beacon Hill, I could talk to both sides, have conversations on both sides, and hopefully, whatever the issue may be, but work out solutions in such a manner.
And that's so important when you look at the partisan politics. We're talking on the national stage, but also up in Beacon Hill, because clearly there's a power set, and we have equal representation, I would say, here in Foxborough, represented by Republican Jay Barrows in the House, and then Senator Timilty at the Senate level. We've experienced the best of both worlds, if you will.
Yeah.
And so by your walking in, and for the Norfolk-Bristol district, there are some definite blue towns and some definite red towns, if we're going to use the Republican Democratic label. So as an independent, I would say that you actually are better positioned to be able to hear both sides. So given that, that's my long wind up to a pitch here. Given that, how do you, Joe Shortsleeve, appeal to a liberal corner of our district and a Republican corner of our district equally, with policy, with thoughts, with desires, with aims and objectives? What is it you want to accomplish, and how does that tie into who we in our large district are?
Well, I think if you look at the district as a whole, I think you would describe the district as moderately conservative. We are purple, clearly, but we tend to be one of the more, in Massachusetts, which is bright blue, we're one of the more conservative areas of the state, okay? But the other thing that's interesting about this district is that, and I've seen various statistics, but I think it ranges from 57 to 65% of the electorate is unenrolled. They're independent. Now, but what happens is when you get to these elections is that people don't have a choice on unenrolled or independent. Not to disparage anybody who's gone before me, but this time, the electorate really has a choice. They have somebody of substance who is sitting in the middle as an independent, and if you are unenrolled or an independent, you actually have a choice. Now, if you're a Republican, to your question, or if you're a Democrat, then you make the question about, okay, am I moderate? Where am I? Where do I fall? Joe's fiscally conservative. Are there certain Republicans he would appeal to? Joe's socially liberal. Are there Democrats that I would appeal to? And I think the answer is yes. There have been people on the state level who have said that I am the most electable candidate in terms of how I represent the district. So, but I'm not naive either. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that this is an easy thing, because it's not. And I am up against two very powerful political parties, and I would just challenge the voters out there to make your own choice. If you are truly unenrolled, if you are fed up with the partisan politics, you do have a choice.
Well, the interesting thing, of course, is that even if you are a Republican enrolled or Democrat enrolled, at the polls, this isn't the primaries, this is the general election. So you can vote for whomever you want. And that's different than, and I was a little surprised, and I don't know what your comment might be. At the primaries, it seemed as though the participation was a little low. It didn't seem to be the groundswell of support for either candidate from the Republican ticket or the Democratic ticket. So what do you take from the election that just occurred for the nomination, and how does that then translate into interest in this race overall?
Well, that's a very good question, and I don't know if anybody has the mathematical formula because it's a special election. It's Tuesday, October 17th. It's not in November. Most people say, oh, well, the election's in November. No, it's not. It's a Tuesday in October. And in and of itself, it being a special, the turnout will be low. Now, the primary they just had, they got a little bit of bad luck with the weather because it was really kind of rainy and windy and not a great day and that affects, I think it affects the elderly. It affects a number of people that, are stuck in traffic trying to get home. So I do think that hurt turnout as well. But I think in a primary, obviously it's just the Democrats and the Republicans, you have your partisans, your people who are really active in those groups showing up. In the general, I still think a general special is going to be fairly heavily partisan, but I do think a general special, you're going to get a bigger slice of the pie. But I do think that turnout that day will not be on the high side, and I do think that this election could slide one way or another, not by large margins.
Okay, so again, I'm talking with Joe Shortsleeve, who is running for the vacant Senate seat, formerly held by Senator Jim Timilty of Walpole. And, Joe, as we get into this, I suppose now the question is, okay, so those 65% who are unenrolled or independent, what is it that we're going to say to them as to why they should come out to the polls and support you, and even to the Republicans and Democrats who may be thinking, we really want an independent voice? What are your, say, top 3 things that you want to accomplish?
You mean up on Beacon Hill?
On Beacon Hill, yes.
Well, I get asked that question a lot, and I think that I fall back to a number of issues, and there are a number of common themes that emerge. Now, you have 9 distinct communities in the Bristol-Norfolk district. Now, and they all have their own individual personalities, as you've already pointed out. But there are some real common themes, and I think one has to do with this Chapter 70 school funding. All the districts are concerned about the formula and how it's used and how fair it is. I think it's time that we perhaps take a closer look at it again and make sure that it's doing what it should. And should it be, should it be more favorable to less affluent communities? And I think the answer to that is yes, it should. Is that happening? You look at the other issues of the 40B affordable housing issue, where, I don't know if your viewers are aware, but unless your housing capacity is at 10%, what they consider affordable, developers, if you're at 8%, developers can come into your town, propose big projects, and bypass local zoning laws. If you're at 10%, they can't do that. So a lot of these communities, like Medfield was one of them, and I believe that Seekonk has been dealing with this, and a number of communities are dealing with that issue. And I think that there's a certain amount of unfairness to the local communities where these developers get this carte blanche to come in and do whatever they want because you're not at a particular number. It almost seems like there needs to be some sort of a waiting period or something that right now, I don't think the local communities are being treated fairly on this. So you look at the 40B law, you look at Chapter 70 funding, and I say, okay, those are 2 areas which I think would affect all 9 communities that are issues we could look at. And then that ties into, real estate taxes. Everybody wants to talk about that. Here in Foxborough, I was talking to one of your town leaders within the past 48 hours, and he said that, one of their goals is to increase the commercial base out on Route 1 to shift some of the burden over to the commercial base to bring down residential property taxes. So, obviously accomplishing that, down in Seekonk, they're concerned about that very topic.
I'm sure they are.
Because they're losing retail. So
And those topics, they're the hot button topics that sort of fester below the surface, and then when something percolates, all of a sudden it's wow. The tax bases are great. We do have currently we have a split tax rate, but I don't think it ever is going to accomplish what it is that people originally thought, because, frankly, once your rate gets split, it's still a rate, and people are always going to think they should pay lower taxes, and people are always going to think that there's a disparity. But then when that tax rate does, by necessity, have to even back up, then all of a sudden there's a hit. And the growth on Route 1 is, as the town leader that you spoke with very astutely pointed out, is a great avenue for us to shift that. And then with the train station proposed, the 19-month pilot project that's coming along for Patriot Station, that should hopefully encourage that type of growth up in that area, potentially. What do you think about that, by the way?
Well, I think that's exactly what it is from Foxborough's point of view.
Yep.
I mean, it's an economic development issue as far as Foxborough is concerned, and I don't disagree. I think that you know, you have to look at that issue and you have to say, okay, is it good for Foxborough? Yes. Could it be good for the greater area? Yeah, it could be too. Could it accomplish some of the things Foxborough wants it to do in terms of now that we have more access, people can get there easier? Would that encourage more business? Could you see more growth along Route 1? Could you get the things we were just talking about, the business taxes, and could that bring down, you know, residential real estate taxes? So it's all interconnected in that regard. The other side of that is Walpole's opposition, and I think that obviously the Finance Control Board of the MBTA has already approved the pilot program. The governor's already said that he is behind this. So I think for the people on the other side of the coin in Walpole who are upset, I think it's time for them to extract concessions from the MBTA. You know, if they want more improvements at their own station, if they want improvements at the crossings, and if they want to talk about train times or speeds, now is the time to extract those concessions, because this pilot program has been approved. So, and I know people are still opposed to it at a certain point, but I look at it from a practical standpoint saying, you know, you need to get what you can get right now, and that's what I would say on the other side. But I think practically speaking, this is happening.
Yep, and the process does need to be managed, and it is the opportunity to create improvements, mitigation, if you will, that the opportunity does provide. So that is an issue that is definitely a hot button. What do you see as being other hot button issues, not just necessarily here just in Foxborough, but in the surrounding communities that you'll be serving?
Well, I don't know. Some of them are very local. I noticed.
All politics is local.
Yeah, I know. I was amused by the article in the Foxborough Reporter about the exhibit at the library that was, you know, apparently for, you know,
the censorship,
freedom of the press, which, you know, got taken down and shut down. I mean, that, you know, that was curious. I guess if you moved into you know, if I were to pick out certain communities and say to you what's going on there, I think that in my community in Medfield, it's a lot of the 40B and the development side. It's a concern over rising taxes. If you move down into Seekonk, they're worried about the loss of you know, all this retail space and this Amazon effect on the economy at this point. Attleboro, they're very upset about the schools. There's been talk about overrides. You know, so the interesting thing for me is, as a journalist for 30 years in Boston on television, these are topics that I covered daily. I mean, I was doing the stories about the override and how, you know, the elderly in town didn't want to pay more taxes, but the young people moving in did want to see that money go to the schools, and that divide. The transportation issues, obviously we just talked about the train, but you know, that flows into a larger question about infrastructure and our decaying infrastructure and our roads and bridges. And again, as a district, as a community, are we getting our, you know, fair share of the dollars from the state transportation department? You know, so when I was 40 years old, and this is not, I'm not want to be disparaging to anybody who's 40 years old, but I thought I had all the answers. Okay, and I can sit here at age 60.
I had all the answers when I was 13.
Well,
so.
there you go. But I sit here at age 60 and I say to you, I don't have all the answers. I really don't. What I am at 60 that I wasn't at 40 is I'm a much better listener, whether it's to my kids or to my neighbors or to anybody who's, you know, seriously asking a question. So one of the things I learned at the I-Team was to do research and to take your time and to be methodical. And to not come up with an answer quickly, but to come up with the right answer. I was with firefighters not too long ago, and they said to me, Joe, now that we're not responding to house fires really that much anymore, along with general lines of that, we're on the front lines of the opioid crisis. We're responding to heroin overdoses and violence and drugs and a lot of unknowns. And one of the firefighters said to me, he said, Joe, what are you going to do to keep us safe? And I looked back at him and I said, you tell me. You tell me what you need, because I'm great at going down the rabbit hole and finding the answers. But you tell me what you need, and that's what I could do on Beacon Hill. Give me let's sit down and figure out what you need, what you want. Then I know the players, the system, and the operation. Let's figure out how you get it.
Sounds as though decades of reporting and listening are going to set you up well for this, as well as the networking that you had to have done over the years in forming the relationships and creating those conversations, not always comfortable, that resulted in getting the information. So seems as though it's... now, I have to ask this, and by the way, again, I'm talking with Joe Shortsleeve, who is running for the Norfolk Bristol seat, recently held by Jim Timilty. You can get a hold of him at joe@joeshortsleeve.com if you want to email him any questions or show him your support, or you can also check him out on his website at www.joeshortsleeve.com. So Joe, there's a motivator for everything we do in life. I like what I do because I like meeting people and talking to people and helping my community and sharing information. What is your primary motivator to run for the seat?
Well, I would have to say that it springs out of my years on the I-team. And I know I mentioned it a little bit earlier, but what we did every day when we arrived at the work was to fight for the taxpayer. So after having left Channel 4, I became a media consultant with a firm downtown. And this firm, the Liberty Square Group, well, what they do is they also run political campaigns. So I had a bunch of things going on in my head at the same time, and I watched how they would run campaigns. And then I also had this kind of marble in the can, as I would say, saying, what can you do here? And I'd thought long and hard about where I lived in Medfield and what I could do. And there was a state rep, and then there was Jim Timilty. And I said, well, I'm never going to run against Jim Timilty because Jim Timilty's a buddy of mine. And Jim Timilty was one of the good guys on Beacon Hill. He was somebody that, in terms of a journalist, always kind of told you the truth. And I picked up the phone and called Jim many times to say, Jim, what's going on with this? And he'd tell me. And then there was a state rep in our area. And I said, you know what? I'm not gonna do that either because I happen to think she's doing a great job. I just think she's doing a great job. And I don't think that's, otherwise it's pretty self-serving.
Right.
Self-serving. I mean, it's like, okay, So then when Timilty abruptly took this other job and stepped down, I was standing outside Shaw's in Medfield, and it was this moment of clarity. And I can tell you that, again, at age 60, there's not all these moments of clarity in terms of a lot of grays in life creep in. And this was just a real moment of clarity for me. It just said, Joe, you should do this. You should try this. You've been thinking about it for a long time. You're positioned for it. You have the resume for it. You have a firm that knows how to do it. So give it a wing.
Great. Well, I always like to think that we do things because we think we can do a better job. Mm-hmm. And this is one of those cases where the stars seem to be aligning, where not only do you think you can do a good job at it, but you'd be following somebody that you respect and think did a good job.
Yeah, no, Jim Timilty did a great job. And I always enjoyed being with him and working with him. And I never thought that I'd be running for his seat. Honestly, I honestly didn't, because I thought that Jim was going to stay forever.
Well, Jim was on our program many times. Yeah. We consider him a friend, and we hope that if you do have the opportunity to take that seat, you'll be a friend of ours here at Foxborough Cable Access and appear every once in a while to give us an update and just keep us in tune with what's going on up in Beacon Hill, because it can be a little bit lonely out here in Foxborough. Our outpost is a touch away from the hustle and bustle of the city.
No.
Of course, we like it that way.
Yeah, okay. Happy to.
Well, here in Foxborough, so, your knowledge of our town seems to be pretty spot on, knowing what's going on in our library and knowing about our local politics. So here in Foxborough, we love supporting people who spend time here. So we've got our Founders Day and we've got our Memorial Day. But there's so much more to doing the job than just attending parades and being part of that. So in your vision of where you're at, are you up at Beacon Hill most of the time? Do you keep visiting hours in the local towns that you would represent? I mean, what is the life of a state senator like for Joe Shortsleeve, do you believe?
Well, I can only tell you that I've never been a state senator, and I have only watched it from the other side at this standpoint. But I can't imagine that you could be a very successful or very popular state senator if you spent a lot of time on Beacon Hill. I would hope to have an office, obviously, within the district with ours. I would hope to prioritize communities in terms of what they want to get done. I would hope to meet with constituents in all 9 of the communities and come up with a priority list and look at what we can and can't do. The tough part about politics that I have learned, and I'm not a politician, I'm learning this as I go along, is if I were lucky enough to be elected, I'd be up for re-election in 13 months. Because there are only 2-year terms.
That is true.
There are only 2-year terms to begin with, and you're only serving half of the remaining term. So but that's not a bad thing, because it forces you to be on people's doorsteps, to be in communities.
To keep everything fresh.
Yes, to keep everything fresh. So that's not a bad thing. And so I guess the answer to your question is I would see myself more in the district, but in order to get the results you need for Foxborough, you're going to be able to pass that legislation on Beacon Hill.
Okay, and then I'm going to ask you one more super tough question, and then I'm just going to give you the last word as I wrap up, because we're so close to running out of time. So if there's one thing you want the folks in Foxborough to know about you, Joe Shortsleeve, candidate for the Norfolk Bristol seat, what would it be?
I'm not doing this to go make friends on Beacon Hill, and I'm not doing this out of ego. I've been on television for 35 years. I'm doing this, I think, for all the right reasons. I want to go up there and really do a good job for the people. And I think that right now, if we could have a dialogue on Beacon Hill, we can get a lot of things done. And as I said before, that this district is almost 60% unenrolled, there are a lot of people out there that have chosen that position. Now they have a chance to say, you know what? Okay, here's a guy that wants to go up there and really fight for us. And I would say, look at me, take a look at my website, joeshortsleeve.com. If you want to email me, joe@joeshortsleeve.com. It's simple enough. I'm available. And I hope that on Tuesday, October 17th, that you'll go in and you'll pull that unenrolled lever.
Joe, thank you so much for taking the time to come out and share with the folks here in Foxborough all that is your campaign, your candidacy, and we wish you the best of luck.
All right, Bob.
All right.
Thank you, sir.
Absolutely. We've been speaking with Joe Shortsleeve, who's candidate for the Norfolk Bristol seat for State Senate, formerly held by Senator Jim Timilty. And a reminder that the polls are on Tuesday, October 17th, here at the Hearn Middle School in beautiful Foxborough. Polls open at 7 a.m. and they'll stay open until 8 p.m. Your vote counts, every vote counts, and if you believe in Joe and Joe's message, then come out and make it count for him. On behalf of all the folks here at Foxborough Cable Access, the volunteers who bring you this program, particularly Deb Storrs and Mike Stewart behind the cameras, Paul Beck behind the glass, and my friends Jillian Larson and Lauren Batar who put it all together. I want to thank you for joining us as we learn about the candidacy of Joe Shortsleeve. Hope you have a great day, and remember, go vote on October 17th. Take care, Foxborough.